sejam bem-vindos a mais um Diálogos Culturais. Vamos combinar um pouquinho o jogo antes de eu fazer a apresentação da nossa convidada. Nós temos aproximadamente uma hora e pouco de conversa. Vocês poderão fazer perguntas depois, né? Se alguém ainda não pegou o fone de tradução simultânea e precisar pegar, ainda dá tempo de correr lá. O que mais que eu preciso combinar aqui? Não, eu acho que é isso. Eu tenho o prazer de apresentar para vocês a nossa convidada de hoje, Azar Nafisi, escritora iraniana, radicada nos Estados Unidos, autora do best-seller Lendo Lolita em Teerã, um livro que apresenta um retrato da vida das mulheres no Irã e que vendeu mais de 2 milhões de cópias no mundo inteiro. Ela foi um dos maiores destaques da Flip, em Paraty, que terminou no domingo, e se apresenta na Bienal do Livro neste sábado, às 13 horas. Quando Lolita em Teerã foi lançado em 2003, o Irã, pelo menos no imaginário popular do Ocidente, tinha muito pouco a ver com literatura, cultura, educação, né? Esse livro, a gente pode dizer sem nenhum exagero, que transformou a Azar numa espécie de embaixadora do Irã, que é um papel que ela, de certa forma, cumpre até hoje, lá nos Estados Unidos, e viajando pelo mundo todo. Ela lecionou literatura ocidental na Universidade de Teerã, até ser expulsa em 1981 por se recusar a usar o véu. Em 97, ela e a família deixaram o Irã rumo aos Estados Unidos, onde ela hoje dirige um projeto chamado Dialogue, como o nosso aqui, na Universidade de Johns Hopkins. Lá ela ensina não islâmicos um pouco do mundo do Islã, entre outras coisas. Ela escreve com frequência para o jornal New York Times, para o Washington Post e para o Wall Street Journal. O seu último livro, O Que Eu Não Contei, publicado no Brasil pela Record em 2009, e nesse momento eu agradeço a presença aqui de Luciana Vilas Boas e de Gabriela Máximo, que tão gentilmente trouxeram a autora para a gente bater esse papo. Esse novo livro é um livro de memórias, são memórias muito tocantes, em que ela faz revelações de sua vida pessoal, segredos de família, são coisas realmente surpreendentes. E eu quero começar essa conversa falando um pouco desse livro. É claro que são muitos os assuntos, espero que vocês me ajudem ao final a completar e passar por todos esses assuntos, a questão da mulher no Islã, a questão política, né? A gente tem notícias hoje, mesmo no jornal, notícias importantes sobre esse assunto. So, hello.
Hello.
Such a pleasure to have you.
Thank you for having me.
So, there's much to talk about today, but let's start from the beginning. The Iranian people, they are very private people, and so it wouldn't be seen as proper saying too much about one's personal life. And so how did you come to write so openly about your personal life?
Well, the first thing I learned about writing is the fact that it always goes against being too proper. It has, any writing to have any meaning, it has to constantly give voice to what is silent, what is not talked about. And you don't choose the kind of book that you write, the book chooses you. It's like falling in love. You always think, I fall in love with a man, I don't know, who is tall, brown eyes, blue hair, and then you meet someone who has blue eyes and brown hair and is not very tall, and you fall in love with him. Why? You don't know. So my book chose me, and after my parents' death, I felt that the most difficult kind of silence is the silence that you confront with death. Death is the most absolute silence of it all. And to defy death, you have to create a conversation with those who are absent. My parents were now absent, and the country of my birth was now absent. And I had to have a conversation with them. And so that is how it happened.
Tell us a little bit more about your mother, the relation with your mother and your father, please.
In this book I tried, Iran is so much in the news nowadays, and it is only in the news because of politics. When you think of Iran, you don't think of these young girls in my book who were eating cream puffs and talking about Lolita. You think of Mr. Ahmadinejad, with a smirk on his face, as if he has just broken the neighbor's window and gotten away with it, both the books that I wrote, I wanted to talk about that other Iran. The Iran about whose history nobody knew, about the variety of its people, its colors, the erotic culture, the sensuality. And so I wrote about this relationship with my mother within the context of the 100-year history, culture of Iranian society. So I begin with my grandmother and end with my daughter. And the relationship with my mother, and I don't know how many men and women in this room feel the same way, was a very difficult one. All my life I felt she never approved of me. All my life I felt she constantly wanted to shape me, and never was she satisfied with the way I was. So there was always this tension. And later in her life, I felt as if I had missed something in her, that I had not listened to her because I was so involved with defending myself that I forgot what she was all about. And this book is, in a sense, discovering my mother, discovering why she was so difficult, discovering her loneliness, and why she was frozen in time. She was frozen in time and in her past. I hope that I wouldn't be.
And your father has written memoirs of his own, but he didn't publish everything.
No, he didn't publish. My father, and the relationship between my parents was always a difficult one. I don't know how many of you as a child felt that you constantly have to take sides with your parents, to judge, to become a judge between the two of them, to act like a grown-up. And this is the same with my parents. My mother could not express herself, my father could. And he always wrote, he talked to me through poetry and stories. And he wrote his memoirs. Both my parents were politically, please tell me when I'm straying from them. Both my parents were in one way or another politically involved. My father was the mayor of Teherán during the Shah's time, and they never knew how to be politically correct. They were always doing things. They were part of the power and they disdained power. They disliked power. And so he went to jail for 4 years because he had problems with, at that time, the Shah and the government. And in jail, he wrote his stories, the story of why he, and he said that he wrote these stories for his children so that the children know that he was not the criminal, that the criminals were free walking the streets of Tehran. And so later, he took out, when he wanted to publish his memoirs, they told him, just leave the politics in, take out the private. Who wants to know about the private? And he took out the private, and the private was what gave life, not the politics. So I tried in my memoir to mention his memoirs and you know, what he felt privately. And as I see here, my mother. This tells you a lot, the photographs. You know, women in Iran are always identified with the way I look there. You notice me with the veil there. But about this regime came into power and used religion as an ideology, the way communists used Marxism as an ideology, the way fascists used fascism as an ideology, to take away from Iran its history and its reality. And so they turned all of us into that. But I always felt heartbroken because my mother and my grandmother's generation could look like this. This is my mother before I was born, I think in late in 40s, or I don't exactly know. This is me when I was very young, long time ago, 100 years ago, with my mother. And my mother thought that she was a good Muslim. She went to the pilgrimage, you know. So, and my grandmother, who never took off her veil, was a Muslim. So who is a Muslim? You know, Michelle Obama and Sarah Palin both say they are Christians. Which one is a Christian? No state or government has the right to say what sort of a Muslim you are or are not. And this is me when also I was very young. Somehow my publishers liked that picture because it looks much better than what I look now. That was at the time my father went to jail. I was about 15 or 16 years old. And so...
you used to keep a diary.
Yes.
And a long time ago, we started a list under the heading "Things I've been silent about." Yeah. What was on that list?
Well, that was during my family are family of diary keepers. We just write everything. In Brazil, I've been writing about that bird. What do you call him? I keep forgetting it. Yeah, it means look at. I'm looking at you.
Look at me.
I'm watching you, and the way the bananas give birth in the heart, the waterfalls. So I have to write about all of this. And in Iran, after the revolution, the first book I wrote was on Vladimir Nabokov, and I wanted to talk about not just Nabokov from a critic's point of view, but the realities I experienced when I first read Nabokov, and how reading him changed the way I looked at life, and how life changed the way I look at him. But I couldn't do that in Iran, and not just for political reasons. I wanted to start my book by saying the first book I read by Nabokov was Ada. It was given to me by my boyfriend Ted, who wrote on it, "To Azar, my Ada, love Ted." And I couldn't do that in Iran, you know. So I wrote in my diary under the heading, "Things I have been silent about," all the things I couldn't talk about in the Islamic Republic. I couldn't talk about, I'm sorry, I just had some bad, well, never mind. I couldn't talk about all the public executions, all the people who were being murdered. I couldn't talk about the repressive laws. In my Iran, women fought for their rights 100 years ago. They changed the laws that were repressive against women. We had a woman minister, the second woman minister in the world. My own mother was one of the first women who went to parliament in 1963. The age of marriage was 18. They changed it to 9. They brought stoning to death. You know, and I wanted to write about all these things, but I couldn't. But also, you couldn't talk about your private self. You know, and so under things I have been silent about, I wrote about all the things we did underground in Iran, because private life had become now underground, like going to parties in Tehran, eating ice cream in Tehran, holding hands in Tehran, watching Marx Brothers in Tehran, and reading Lolita in Tehran. And I also wrote about the private things. And I discovered that the worst censor is your own private censor. It is easier to talk about politics than it is to talk about yourself. And so that was the things I have been silent about.
And I'm just very impressed with your reading on Vladimir Nabokov's Lolita. You suggest that the book is a critic of the totalitarian mindset that always imposes its own desires. Would you please tell us something more about that?
Well, in reading Lolita in Tehran, I chose specifically books that were not considered political, because I think books die They just perish if we use them the way tyrants use us, if we use them to give a message. Or to use them for political purposes. And books are subversive and revolutionary when they are themselves. So I chose books that nobody would think is political to show how at the heart of every great book there is a criticism of life. It is telling the truth. Isabel Allende, in a talk, had said that she said that she's going to talk about an old Jewish proverb, which says, "What is truer than the truth?" And the answer is, it's the story. So story is always truer than the truth. And Nabokov writes about this small girl whom this man wants to change into the image of the girl who had died. Because if you remember, at the first page of Lolita, Humbert tells us that Lolita had a predecessor, that when he was a young man, he was in love with this girl, Annabel Lee, and Annabel dies, and from then on, Humbert is frozen. He wants to recreate Annabel Lee. And every young girl he sees, he wants to turn her into an object of his desire. And that is what he does to Lolita. He takes away a young girl and he says, "Oh, she seduced me. Oh, she was vulgar. She was like the Britney Spears of the 50s. No person has the right to take away the life of another because she's vulgar or she's a little girl." And Humbert imposed his dream on Lolita. And so we never know what Lolita can become because he, in fact, murders her, you know. And for us living in Iran under a tyranny, a tyrannical regime always wants to impose its voice, its image on everyone. The first thing Hitler did, the first thing Stalin did was to take away the voice, to take away the colors, to impose everyone to look the same. You know, and that is what they did in Iran, especially to women. Women became a symbol of what tyranny was because they took away from women their individual selves. Some women in Iran liked to wear the veil, some women in Iran liked not to wear the veil. They were different. Some were atheists, some were Jews, some were Christians, some were Muslims who didn't like to wear. And for us in Iran, Lolita became the most subversive book, not Gorky and Sholokhov, but Lolita.
Yeah. Well, in your books, you talk about the situation of women in Iran.
Yes.
And we also saw today in the newspaper that the woman sentenced to death by stoning in Iran, Sakineh, she reportedly appeared in the Iranian TV confessing the crimes. What's your take on this case?
Well, I have been very active in this case. From the very start, I worked with this amazing website, which actually this Canadian woman, Heather Reisman, and started. It's called freesakineh.org, and I have been following this case very closely. To begin with, from the very start, when the Islamic Republic came to being, and the first thing they did in Iran was to change the laws for women. The first law they changed was the family protection law, which gave women protection both at home and at work. And they brought what they called stoning to death for what they called prostitution and adultery. Now you have to remember that in Iran, under the Islamic Republic, men can marry as many times as they want, and there is temporary marriage in Iran when you can rent a woman from 5 minutes to 99 years. So that is not prostitution. but a woman having a relationship with a man is prostitution, and they say she should be stoned to death. And that is what they did to Sakineh. And this is not the only case, there are others waiting. In Iran, there has been a campaign for a long time against stoning. Iranian women started it inside Iran. They also started 1 million campaign of signatures against the repressive laws in Iran. So it came from within Iran, not the West. Everything that happens, they say, oh, it is the West. It is Obama and Bush who are doing it. No. Iranian people, it is an insult against the Iranian people to say that they like to be stoned. You know, they say, oh, it's our culture, you know. Islam is great because it stones us to death. It is like saying that Christians loved the Inquisition. You know, they loved burning witches to death. They said, oh, it's our culture, you know. Women in the West didn't have the right to vote until 19th century. In Brazil, you said 1937. In Switzerland, 1974. 11 years after Iran got the right to vote, you know. So we all have terrible things in our cultures. We have slavery, we have burning of women, and we have the right to change, you know. And that is what Iran had done. I'm sorry I'm going away from this, but a lot of people tell me that, oh, this is the Iranian law, we don't need to intervene. Of course you need to intervene. You don't need to go and militarily attack Iran, but to support your own values, you have to support this woman in Iran who is being stoned to death because they say she had a relationship with a man. And show trials and confessions are part of this regime. Mm-hmm. The first year I went to Iran, they started it with the people from the Shah's regime. They would beat and torture people like Stalin's time, and then bring them to television to say, we are guilty, kill us. So they make the victims complicit in the crime they are committing against them. This woman, I said the last thing about this woman, please don't believe it, because this woman gave a secret interview to The Guardian in England. In that interview, she said, they are killing me because I'm a woman, because women don't have a right in Iran. And she said that she is so happy that the international community is supporting her, giving voice to her. And her son, when President Lula, you know, said something about it, her son came and said, we're so happy that he said it. We hope that Turkey would also, you know, condemn these acts. Please don't believe it. These are confessions under torture, and they kill you once physically, they kill you another time by making you deny who you are. I heard the news this morning. It is very troubling, and I feel very helpless. It is how can we tolerate a world where they do these things? Can we tolerate it? We should ask ourselves. It happens in Brazil. My wonderful now friend and editor, Luciana, has been telling me about the case of the football player. Yeah. You know, this happens even in civilized world, you know. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to get...
No, fine. You probably saw the front cover of Time magazine. Yeah. They say that this is what happens if you leave Afghanistan. In a way to say that this is what Islam does.
No, it's not.
It's what's your...
You know, religion is a victim. They are killing Muslims. You should understand that. Sakineh, the name of this woman who's being stoned to death, is Sakineh. It's the name of the Prophet's daughter. They say that poor people in Iran like this regime. It's an insult to poor people. Poor people are not stupid. Poor people want to be happy. They want to be educated. Poor women like to have a choice. Having a choice is not a Western thing. It's not just women in America that want to marry the man they love, not to be beaten. So Sakineh is a Muslim. She comes from a traditional family, and she comes from a poorer strata of the society. She is a Muslim. Ahmadinejad is a Muslim. Whose Islam do you choose? The world has to choose the kind of religion. Christianity, in the name of Christianity, the worst things happened. Fascism did not happen in Iran. It wasn't Islam. It was at the heart of Western civilization, at the heart of the Christian civilization that fascism came, you know. But German people and the people around the world had the right to say no. So please do not condemn the religion that itself becomes a victim. Religion should not be the state. Religion is private. And once religion becomes a state, it becomes like all states that are tyrannical. And so please, this is the problem here. We have become intellectually lazy. It is much lazier and easier to say this is Islam, and so we do two things. Either we go far to the right and say this is Islam, let's kill them all, or let's leave them. Or we go far to the left and we say this is their culture. Let us not support them, because supporting them is interfering them. No, this is not humane. And no matter who does it, we should object. In the same way that we objected to America in Abu Ghraib, we object to anything that goes against the Declaration of Human Rights. And this is not Islam, but this is Taliban, and this is the law of the Mujahideen, and we should not accept it. You're asking me questions which makes me give a lecture. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, fine.
Please stop me. I become a tyrant when I have the microphone.
Então vamos aproveitar e se alguém tiver alguma pergunta para fazer, podemos já começar a fazer algumas perguntas. Por favor, fiquem à vontade.
How do you define Muslim feminism today? Because we have different ways to look for, to fight for human
Yes.
women rights. And we see that many women, Muslim women, wants to wear the veil, or thinks that you can be a Muslim and also have your basic rights.
Well, you know, the whole point here is to have a choice. There are 2 points. First, you need to have a choice. If Iranian women want to wear the veil, they should wear the veil without the state telling them that they should wear. If Saudi women want to wear the veil, they should wear the veil without somebody flogging them. You know, if all Iranian women want to wear the veil, why do you need to flog them? Does anybody flog anybody in Brazil to go to church? You know, so that is what I object to. In Iran, for a while, during my grandmother's time, there was a law for about a few months where they said all women should take off the veil. My grandmother didn't leave home for 3 months because she wanted to wear her veil. You know, so please do understand that this is a question of choice, and it is not a question of religion. Whether that is the first thing. The second thing, veil has become a political issue. Veil should not be politicized. It is a question of faith. And during my grandmother's time, veil, whoever wore the veil, partly, of course, it was pressure from family, but it was a personal thing. Now, it is a symbol of the state, and that is what is wrong. And the last thing I want to say, nobody dares to talk about the veil, you know, the philosophy behind the veil. When women in America and in Europe were asking for their rights, Harriet Beecher Stowe, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, they were told that Bible says that a woman should stay at home. These women in America, and I'm sure in Brazil, were told that you are against religion. And these women had to fight and say, no, these traditions are not good. If Bible or Torah, the Jewish faith in Israel right now, the family laws are very repressive because they're religious laws, you know. And Jewish women have the right to say no. So the veil, the philosophy behind the veil, the way my grandmother and great-grandmother's generation questioned the veil, they said that to use a woman as an object of sex, to say that, you know, to say that my hair makes the men in this room go crazy, this is an insult to the men. If a man cannot tolerate looking at us the way we look, he should be in a hospital, you know, not in the streets. So to say that a woman should be invisible because she creates sexual, you know, and why don't women have sexual feelings? Why can't I, looking at you, you know, have sex? They say women have no feelings, so they can look at men the way they are. But a woman should hide because of the fact that her body is something dangerous. Now, I don't accept that philosophy. I have to tell you, I don't accept that philosophy. When women in Muslim societies wore the burqa, that was the time when they did not leave home. Women left home only to go to the public bath or to places, and they were accompanied by men, and they had to be invisible. But now, women in societies that are Muslim majority are teachers, they're lawyers, they're doctors, they want to be policemen, so they are visible, you know. And so we need to have the discussion about the veil, but we should not turn the question of the veil into women who wear the veil are horrible, the women who wear the veil are backward. No, some of my best students wore the veil. Some of my own relatives wear the veil, and they're very intelligent and lovely people, but we discuss it. We discuss it. Should I put this on?
Do you know the conditions, of the prison where that girl is? I mean, is she being fed? Okay.
Oh, this is rather confusing.
You can hear it, yes.
But I'm glad you speak
I
English
just want to
anyway.
know if you know about the conditions of the prison where that girl is. I mean, rapes, or can she take a shower? I mean, just, you know, the details about the prison. Do you know that?
You know, there have been many, actually, memoirs from Iranian prisons. Unfortunately, some of the best have not been translated into other languages, and they should be. One of the worst things about Iran is that they don't even act according to their own laws. You know, so once you are in jail, a lot of times you have no right, your family cannot see you. The lawyer, a lot of times the lawyers are put in jail. Like the lawyer of this woman, Sakine, was first threatened, and then he had to escape the country. I mean, this is the kind of a situation you have. And there have been cases, of course, beatings, because you see, flogging. If a woman does not use the proper mandatory veil, she can be flogged up to 76 lashes. So flogging is something very normal in Iranian jails. There have been reported, especially after June 2009, there have been reports of both young men and women being raped in jail, because rape and the insults, they dehumanize you. Every single person in this room thinks that they have rights as human beings because they are accepted for their own unique self. But once they strip you of that humanity, you yourself hate yourself, you know, and that is what they do to the prisoners. There has been reports of torture, the burning people. I mean, the list of tortures is, all tortures are the same. You know, is very similar to every other dictatorship. And this confession, the report in The Guardian today, I didn't see the Brazilian papers, was that the woman's voice was very shaky, that she didn't look very good, and her lawyer said that she had been beaten very badly in order to come to confess. And that is why I think one of the things that the international community can do is to send international observers to Iranian prisons and have what Amnesty International does, have interviews with families and with former prisoners.
How is the stoning process? Is it a public execution?
No. They bury the man up to his waist, the woman up to here. And everybody is supposed to throw a stone, but the stones they choose has to be not too small, because it won't kill, but not too big, because big stones kill you faster. Have to be medium size. It is said that if someone can escape, then they are pardoned. But otherwise, they stone you until you die. And, you know, you are really, really supporting your own values. Because how can you live, how can you tolerate that another woman who feels like you? I mean, I always imagine, that is the good and the bad thing about imagination. If you put yourself in that person's place, to be buried and to have the stones come to you from fellow human beings, it degrades both those who cast the stone and the one who is being stoned and we who witness it. I think it degrades every single one of us.
Yeah, sure.
But if people refuse to stone to go to...
Well, many do. You don't hear about that. Many do, but it traumatizes the whole society. It dehumanizes the whole society. There are always some who go. And I tell you, this is not just in Iran. I was in Toronto, in Canada, in June. There were two cases where a father and a son, took the 16-year-old daughter of theirs because she didn't wear the veil when she left home. They murdered her because the father said, every time she left home, I felt naked, you know, as if she is his property, that, you know, what she does is him. And a mother tried to strangle her 19-year-old daughter for the same reason. So when we remain silent about these things, they come to our back door. It is not that these things happen. You know, in every democracy, something terrible has happened and is happening. So when you look at dictatorships, they become distorted mirrors of what we can become. You know, there is never a time to say we won't fight to be free. And so this happens everywhere. Or I keep thinking, because of you mentioning Bruno, I keep mentioning someone else mutilating this young woman, you know, because she was pregnant by him. It is in all of us, you know. You notice that politics always takes over.
Yeah.
We don't talk about literature. We should remember that literature is always the antidote to politics. I'll say something later. I want you to have time to ask your questions.
Alguma outra? Alguém quer mais perguntar? Temos várias perguntas aqui.
I have two questions.
Yeah.
One, do you think that this international pressure in this specific case will save the life of this woman? And the second is, you as a very active person in these questions, take risk on your own life?
Well, the second one I rather not answer because, you know, so many people have taken so many risks, far more than I ever have. Everyone who says anything is considered by the regime as a spy. You're usually a US spy and an Israeli spy. I would like to also become a Brazilian spy, if you let me, and a counter-revolutionary, whatever that means. So they call me that too in their media. But what you said about the first question, I think it's very important. Many of the apologists for these regimes say that international community getting involved makes it worse. I want to tell you, if you refer to the cases that became very famous about Iran, there's the case of, the ones I remember, Akbar Ganji, who was in jail, and the recent cases of Haleh Esfandiari, Ramin Jahanbeglou. At least I can call about 6 or 7 cases that I remember recently. Each one of these cases became an international thing. And in each case, they had to free the people in the end. This is different for the reasons I tell you. Iranian regime right now feels very, very vulnerable and very isolated. And both Sakineh and her son thanked the international community for helping them. Because if the international community was not there, this woman would have been killed already, like many other women. Now, I don't know what they do now because of what they said now, that she has committed a murder. But you notice that now they have to be careful. Even when they want to kill her, they can no more say we're stoning her to death because she's an adulteress. They have to find a quote-unquote legitimate excuse to do this. So international community has to make it its own business. Not just in case of Iran, in case of this woman, Afghanistan, Darfur, if it happens in US, if it happens in England, if it happens in Brazil, we as a community should let them know that for us it is not tolerable. And I think that Brazil letting Iran know was very important. It was a turning point.
Tinha uma aqui. Lá.
It's about literature. When you first started writing your memoir, did you have the structure ready in your mind, the structure of the book? Or how could you choose what to put in there and what to leave apart?
It is actually a very impossible process because, you know, I remember Margaret Atwood was once asked, how do you write? And she said, you know, I don't know. It seems as if there are voices from distant villages beckoning to me. She said, it seems as if there is a bloody cleaver in the middle of the living room. And I say, what's that cleaver doing there? It needs to be investigated. So for me, both reading and writing is always an act of investigation. You don't know. People think that writers know, but we want to find out, you know, the way a reader wants to find out. So an idea comes to you and obsesses you. It doesn't go away, you know. A voice, an experience, an image, and you start building a world around that image. You know, and every time you go back to that world, you add something or you take something away. So even in my memoir, I noticed that I can't talk about everything. And that some of the people that were very important in my life, like my own brother, plays a much smaller role than some of the others, because this book has to have an end. You know, and it has to be a cohesive world, so you select, you pick and choose, and I threw away a lot of things. You should be very thankful that I did.
Have you ever considered a career as a novelist, for example?
I have to admit that for me, the novel is the highest form of telling a story. If I ever dare, I will. It has to come. These two books, they came as memoirs because there were too many facts. And I talked to my editor. This last book, I really didn't want to write it. It was very painful. And every once in a while, I call my editor and I say, I'm not writing this, or I'm turning this into a novel. But I knew that it would be a lie, because it wasn't a novel, you know. In the same way that a novel cannot be a memoir. You should not write a memoir if you want to fictionalize the whole thing, you know. That is how it was.
Perguntas? Temos uma aqui.
Can you talk more about literature as the antidote? Because I was wondering if you think that the study of literature or reading literature has a role in changing everything we need to change in the world.
Yes, I'm very glad you asked that, because, you know, I tell a lot of people, because you notice that this past, I don't know how long we've been talking, mainly we've been talking about what we consider politics, and sometimes it worries me that that happens. But for me and for, I think, any writer, I was just at marvelous flip, and almost every writer who were very different was saying the same thing, that to resist the tyranny of reality is an existential act. It is not a political act. And so as a writer, you don't take sides. I mean, I don't want to overthrow Mr. Ahmadinejad. I don't belong to a political group. But as a woman, as a human rights activist, and as a writer and a teacher, when somebody questions everything that you are, existentially you respond. So I think writing is existentially against the tyranny of not just man, but of time. We write, as Nabokov said, he said he wrote his memoirs as conclusive evidence that he has lived. You know, every moment we die, this moment can never be retrieved. How can we tell our children, our children's children, and other people that we were here? There was a moment we were here. It is through writing, it is through art, it is through music. So you connect to your past and you defy death because you write. And for me, writing is about defiance. It is never an aspirin. It is never closure. You know, I told my editor, please don't turn this book into Reading Lolita Part 2. You know how they love in America and maybe in Brazil? You write one book and then it becomes Return of Reading Lolita. Reading Lolita in Washington, you know. And I said, this is not also an Iran book. It's not about Mr. Ahmadinejad, because people love to write Iran books, their books sell. I said, this is a family memoir, you know, and it is not a how-to-do book, which I hear in Brazil also has a bestseller list. It is not how to feel happy after your mother's death, or how to deal with your family. Writing is not closure, because pain is part of life, you know, and you have to face pain. So writing is about facing pain and protesting it. Not destroying it. I want to say the last thing about writing. Every great writing is about truth. You want to know, and every great reader wants to know. You said, did you say it in Portuguese, the quote from Nabokov you liked?
Curiosidade é insubordinação no seu estágio mais avançado.
Yeah, curiosity is insubordination in its purest form. And that is what literature is. It is curiosity. So curiosity forces you not to conform. Tolstoy says that literature is like washing your eyes, looking at the world through new eyes, and about the most ordinary things, which become extraordinary. And truth is always a call to action. Because once you know the truth, you cannot be quiet. You have to do something. So literature is not, it is dangerous, not because it questions the world, but it questions you. And readers, when they read a good book, they have to feel uncomfortable. They have to say, oh, I didn't know this. Oh, I could be this. You could be the villain in the story, not the good guy, you know. So that is why literature is so subversive. And we should all talk about literature and not let politics take over our lives.
Muito bom. Pessoal, alguma pergunta a mais?
Aproveitar o silêncio para dizer que o livro dela está ali na banquinha, pediram para eu dizer que desconto.
Esse aqui, né?
O segundo é. Não sei, mas o primeiro não tem.
May I say something about this experience I had this morning? For me, coming to Brazil has been an amazing experience, and I need to go home to think about it. I have to thank you for bringing me here. This morning you took me to the tech garden. And when you asked about literature, I was thinking about the tech garden. You need to have imagination to live. And in my country now, in America, we're losing that power for imagination and poetry. You were telling me that this place was garbage. And that every morning when you came to work, you were looking at the garbage. And you resist the idea of garbage, the way we resist the idea of tyranny. And you have to imagine a garden that doesn't exist, but you first have to imagine and have that vision. And when we were walking through this tech garden today, and you had now imprisoned the rubbish, I said, this is literature, transforming garbage into the trees, into a space. When we lived in Iran, we resisted not through violence, but through imagining our world without violence and transforming the violence into the trees, like the story of Shahrazad, where she does not kill the king, she tells him stories and makes him look at the world through the new eyes. And I want to thank you for showing me the tech garden today.